as we're told from people who were with him, wanted to get back to the White House all day, but again was listening very closely to his security team, who wanted to be absolutely certain that that was going to be all right. We were talking earlier, the president is very eager to make plain tonight that his mood is retaliatory, to express impatience. We got a little bit of a hint of that from a statement from Ari Fleischer, his press secretary today, who said not so long ago, "We will find these people and they will suffer the consequences of taking on this nation." I wouldn't be surprised to hear something like that from the president tonight. Equally eager to get back, Peter, just as the president is back, congressional leaders, they're planning to make a public statement tonight at 7:30 p.m. Again, everybody wanting to show this is business as usual in Washington, certainly not usual in the way we would ever define it, but they want to show a government that is up and functioning, because they think that the PR element here, in terms of sending a message around the world, is every bit as important as security measures.
As we wait, I'm going to just bring in the voice of Charlie Gibson at the moment, because I do not want to go away from this scene on what I assume is the south lawn of the White House. We'll just stay with this and watch the president come out. But Charlie, you've been trying to get some kind of handle on casualties throughout the day. Have had any success?
Well, no, Peter. People want a number, and as if it were some way to quantify these most horrific of acts, and properly no one has been willing to speculate on what that number may be. Obviously, any low number would have to be ratcheted up at some point, and to give upper-end estimates are probably too horrible to imagine. As the mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani, said, when we get the final number, it will be more than we can bear. The concern, obviously, is that there were emergency workers inside the World Trade Centers when they collapsed, when the Twin Towers came down, and the evacuations had not been completed. And as the Secretary of Defense said a moment ago, when we get the totals from the Pentagon, it will be a lot more than a few. We do have some estimates on injured, but again, these are highly unreliable. The mayor, again, saying at least 2,100 injured in New York, 1,500 taken to Liberty State Park across the Hudson River in New Jersey, 600 taken to hospitals, and the most chilling, one of the most chilling quotes that we've heard today, St. Vincent's Hospital here in New York had more than 200 injured. One doctor, Stephen Stern, saying there are hundreds of people burned head to toe. And we know many burn victims have been evacuated, some as far away as being taken to Canada, some being flown to Vanderbilt Hospital in Nashville. The military apparently flying those burn victims out.
Thanks, Charlie. There he is, the president, coming back from a trip that has taken him first to Florida today to talk about education, when ironically the political establishment in Washington wanted to talk about federal budget and keeping the country out of recession. And then this happened just as the president was visiting a group of people. He learned about it, spoke to the people, then moved on to Louisiana and then out to Nebraska, where he went into a bunker totally reminiscent of the situation which the president might have found himself in, and which the country prepared for during the Cold War, when the issue was nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union. And now, after something of a sharp debate, we gather, between the president's political staff and between the Secret Service, the president is coming home to the White House. There's nothing that this president, this new and young president, could ever have imagined was going to occur on his watch, which would test his leadership qualities so. And he is going, and how he responds, how he accommodates the country's frustration, and how he accommodates a country's anxiety and anger, and how he responds or finds a way to respond, and as we've said many times, to whom will mark George Bush, however it goes, one way or the other. As he will speak to the nation at 9 o'clock tonight, and as Claire Shipman said to us, the representatives of the Congress, who've been pretty forthright today, earlier Senator Biden early today, saying that Congress must be seen to keep going, that the most important thing is that terrorists not be allowed to see that American life has been interrupted to any greater extent than it already has today. So we're going to hear in full later tonight, but we shall be on the air for the entire time for any development. Lisa Stark, who covers aviation for us on a full-time basis from Washington, is in Seattle today. Among other things, the headquarters of the Boeing company, which had its aircraft involved in these hijackings today, 757 and a 767. What can you tell us, Lisa?
Well, Peter, it now appears that the weapon of choice appears to have been knives on board these planes. We know from reports from our sources and others that reports from flight attendants on an American flight.
Good afternoon, Mark Brown, along with Laura Diaz. We are monitoring the events that are going on in Washington, D.C. If anything breaks on a national scene, we will go back to it. In the meantime, what we want to do is bring you up to date on what's happening locally, and a lot. It has been primarily here a response to the events happening back east. There have been no direct threats against any facilities here, but people are certainly getting ready.
And of course, all the city officials are urging calm today, that people try to go as well as they can along with their normal lives. The biggest thing that occurred earlier today is that LAX was shut down. They actually went in with bomb-sniffing dogs and evacuated LAX. People are being urged to stay away from there. Even if they knew somebody who was coming in on a flight, if they were going to pick them up, they should call the airline first.
Absolutely. And 3 of the 4 flights that were hijacked and then slammed into buildings or into the ground were bound for LAX. 3 out of the 4. There are the list right there of the 4 flights. And we can tell you that Flight 11, that was the one that it's believed slammed into the World Trade Center, one of the World Trade Center buildings. American Airlines Flight 77 with 64 people on board. That's believed to have hit the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. United Airlines Flight 175, Boston to LAX. It's believed that one is the other one that hit the World Trade Center. And then United Airlines Flight 93, Newark to San Francisco.
And what we know, too, Mark, is that on American Airlines Flight 11, where there were 81 passengers, 11 crew on board, we know that there is one local victim, 41-year-old Edmund Glazer. And we've been monitoring, of course, that situation, and we will be getting further lists as the day progresses.
Indeed.
In the meantime, our Philip Palmer is at LAX. He was one of the reporters on the scene who was asked to leave the scene not that long ago. Philip, what can you tell us?
Well, Laura, you can see behind us, the airport is just a standstill. And the one thing that is most telling here, we're probably a half a mile away from the runway, just silence. This building would never be silent. Planes would be backed up miles in a row landing here, and it's been silent all day long. No air traffic, no car traffic, nothing throughout this airport. As you said, we were told to leave by the FBI at about 1 o'clock. We and every other media member that was in there, they've basically cleared the entire airport out. Let's show you some videotape from earlier today that was shot. What had happened was the media was trying to stick around even after the airport had been closed, but airport police came along and told us all to move. The video you're seeing now is of a plane from Australia that landed here right around 12:30. What had happened was they were told by the pilot that they would have gone on to Canada but didn't have enough fuel. That's the only reason they were allowed to land at LAX. No other planes have been coming in or out of here since about 8 o'clock this morning. So it's been a virtual standstill. They have gone through the parking garages. They've gone through the airport with bomb-sniffing dogs. We do not know of any credible threats of any suspicious packages or bombs being found, but what they're doing is searching with the dogs, with police, and they know every inch of that airport. They did not want anyone in that building as they searched. But as you can see again, as we come back here live, you can see the planes all lined up. And as if we take a look over here, we're basically at the corner of Sepulveda and Westchester Parkway. All of the streets around the airport also blocked off. But I can tell you this, Mark and Laura, that vehicle traffic through this area has been at a minimum throughout the day. Not a lot of people coming down here. Obviously, the word is out. So many people calling friends on the telephone, letting them know, you know, did you hear, did you see, did you watch? So for the most part, a lot of people have left this area, and they haven't been coming down here. And one other thing, even this morning when they were evacuating passengers, telling them where to go, it was somewhat confusing, but for the most part, everybody went through the procedures, got out, did it in an orderly manner. It was not really that chaotic. So many people, though, very emotional today. We'll have more on that coming up a little bit later. Back to you guys in the studio.
All right, certainly the level of emotion understandable today, Philip, given what has occurred in this nation today. Giovanna Lara is standing by. She's in downtown Los Angeles. A number of buildings and facilities have been closed today. Giovanna has more on that.
This is a very different downtown than the one we are used to. Very few cars are on the road, and most of the buildings, as you said, are empty. Earlier today, there was a mass exodus. People astonished by the attack rushed out of the area to the safety of their homes.
Terrible. Everybody's terrified. Everyone's scared.
I'm just nauseated, actually. It's a little surreal, everything, the situation. It's kind of shocking.
Makes you kind of wonder if we're at war or not.
The mood very sober. People quietly evacuated their high-rise offices downtown. Many of them talked solemnly on their cell phones.
My closest friend in this world is in New York, and I can't get a hold of him right now.
One woman was overtaken by emotion when she learned of the attack. Her aunt worked at the World Trade Center, and there was still no word whether she escaped before the collapse.
Not many people made it out, unfortunately. And, you know, I just can't imagine what it was like being trapped in those towers.
Within an hour, most of the downtown area had been evacuated. The courts closed, businesses shut down, the streets, usually bustling with traffic, were transformed into a virtual ghost town.
It's reminiscent of a war. I mean, it looked like what we saw of Berlin being bombed during World War II. I've never seen anything like it. You never thought living in this country that we could be subjected to this.
We have to pray that God would take care of them and strengthen them.
And we're back live, and you can see the streets this afternoon remain quiet. And if you take a look over here, we're across the street from the Staples Center where the Madonna concert was scheduled for tonight. You can see at this time, if the concert had gone at this time, this parking lot would have been filling up with cars, but right now it remains empty. Live downtown, I'm Giovanna Latta, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Giovanna, the silence is deafening as we watch along with you. We just saw LAX, and then, of course, downtown right now where very few people are. Is it your sense that people who live in the area, because there are some people who live in those downtown high-rises, have they remained in downtown Los Angeles? Giovanna?
Yes. Laura, I'm sorry. I didn't hear your question. Can you repeat that?
I said, is it your sense that those people who do live in downtown Los Angeles, and there are some who live in the high-rises, for instance, Bunker Hill, that area, are they staying in downtown, or are people elected to leave downtown Los Angeles today?
My understanding is that you asked me if people who live downtown are still in their homes. I do not have any information that people who lived in high-rises here downtown were evacuated. My information is that people voluntarily evacuated earlier today. The building owners asked the businesses that inhabited those buildings to ask their employees to leave calmly, and that is what they did. As for residents who live in the downtown area, I don't have that information.
With regard, what's your sense about when things might perhaps return to normal, when things might open back up? Have you been able to gather anything from the folks who might be there about when things might return to normal?
No word on that yet, Mark. When we spoke to the people earlier this morning, they were just leaving for the day. Most of the buildings have been evacuated now, and there are very few people still here to ask those kinds of questions from, but we will definitely try to find out and bring that information for you, as I'm sure many people will want to know whether or not they should return to work tomorrow.
Okay, Giovanna Lara reporting live from downtown Los Angeles. We thank you for that live report. In the meantime, Sid Garcia has been our man on the scene at City Hall East to be precise. He's been covering the news conferences as elected officials have spoken to the people. Sid, what new information do you have?
Well, let me shed some light as far as the downtown area and City Hall getting back to normal. Just a short while ago, about 3 o'clock this afternoon, the police chief, Bernard Parks, City Council President Alex Padilla held a news conference here. Here's the latest. One, city employees for the City of Los Angeles are urged to return to work tomorrow. City Hall will remain closed for the rest of the day. City government leaders will be meeting again to figure out what to do for the rest of the day. As far as police activity is concerned, LAPD on tactical alert, 12-hour shifts for the officers. The bomb squad is out. Bomb squad had to answer to about 20 bomb scares, all proved to be false. And according to Chief Parks, everything is working well and the city is safe. This is what it looked like earlier today in downtown LA as everybody tried to get out of downtown after realizing that their businesses were going to be closed. Again, according to city leaders here, City Hall will reopen tomorrow. All city employees are urged to return to work tomorrow morning as the city tries to get back to business. This is the afternoon, the Bulldog edition of the Daily News Today, and I think this says it all. And talking to people today, they had long looks on their faces and disbelief that something like this could happen here so close to home. Even though it's 3,000 miles away, it affects people here. Live at City Hall, Sid Garcia, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Mark and Laura, back to you in the studio.
All right, thank you, Sid. It does seem at times like it's not real, like we're dreaming this or imagining it, but unfortunately it is all too real. Michelle Tuzzi joins us now. Our colleague is in the newsroom with more information on what's closed today, what facilities are not open to the public, and when they might be reopened. Michelle.
Mark, as we just heard from Sid, city employees are being asked to report to work tomorrow. City Hall will be open tomorrow. Courthouses will be open. Court will be in session. As for schools, we're learning that Cal State University officials are meeting sometime this evening to determine whether or not classes will be in session tomorrow. That's still a big question mark. They were not in session today. LAUSD, LA Unified Schools, were in session today, and most schools will be open tomorrow. We are being told also Orange County schools will be open tomorrow. However, Loyola High School in Los Angeles will be closed tomorrow. We have received word about that. Amusement parks, we're just getting word that Universal Studios, Disneyland, and Disney's California Adventure will be reopening tomorrow. Disneyland and California Adventure will be open at 10 a.m. We're told that their employees are supposed to report at their normal times. The Getty Center will remain closed tomorrow to visitors and staff. They also had lectures and other events that were scheduled through the weekend. We're told that those are being canceled or postponed. As you know, the airports remain closed. All commercial air traffic has been halted until at least noon tomorrow, and the New York Stock Exchange will also be closed tomorrow. So that's the latest on closures. What will be open tomorrow? If we get an updated list, we'll come back to you with that information. Mark, Laura, back to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. In the meantime, if you're one of the people sitting at home, if there's information which you desperately need, we've got two numbers, one for the LA area and one for Orange County. There you see them on the screen. LA City, 888-356-4661. If you live in the Orange County area, 714-628-7085. Officials standing by to assist you.
All right, some more numbers to tell you about, too. This is the Red Cross hotline. They have put out a call for people to donate blood, and you, our viewers in the Southland, have responded brilliantly. In fact, so well that there's a backup now. There's about a 3 to 4 hour wait at last report for people who want to donate blood. What you do is you call this number now, set up an appointment if you want to donate blood to the Red Cross. Now, there are other places where you might be able to do that as well. You might want to check with a hospital if you live near one, where you might be able to donate as well. They stress now it takes some 48 hours for blood that's donated today to enter into the stream that's available for use by people where it's badly needed. The number again, 800-448-3543. If you can't do it today, do it over the next couple of days because it will go where it's needed.
And of course, it's very important that you do make an appointment. We know that people want to help, and that comes from a very good place, but it's a bit chaotic today, and the demand is so high, they want to be able to process that blood and get it to where it is needed. In the meantime, we want to remind you, if you want to get any of that other information, which you just saw, if you didn't get a pen quickly enough, it is on our website, abc7.com. You can call it up. It'll be there to help you throughout the ensuing days.
All right. President Bush expected to address the nation in about an hour and 45 minutes. We will, of course, bring that to you live. And in the meantime, we're going to go back now to ABC Network News coverage of the attack on America.
Of this one particular aircraft that they were able to track from Boston, maneuvering in such a way that it became clear to them at a horrifying moment that this was an aircraft not following its flight plan that was headed to New York City. And if you put that together with the sense that some people got from the aircraft that there was something going on board these aircraft, simply horrified everybody in the law enforcement establishment, not to mention the two airlines, American and United, are involved. And Charlie Gibson and I have just momentarily been talking about this. Have we got this video available? Can we just move this video up and we'll listen first to the man who tracked this one aircraft. Remember, there were two. Tracked this one aircraft as it was headed towards New York City.
Plane took off about 8 o'clock out of Logan in Boston on its way to Los Angeles, climbed to 29,000 feet and cruising at about 450 knots. About that time, 8:28, the flight took an immediate hard left turn due south. The speed initially decreased by over 100 miles an hour and then increased to over 500. And then as it approached the New York area, it slowed to all the way down to about 300 knots. And then tragically it impacted in the World Trade Center. American 11 was indeed the first flight, we have confirmed that, of the two.
But as ABC's Charlie Gibson points out in this conversation with me just a moment, Charlie, there were two rogue aircraft who were out of flight pattern.
Well, Peter, the two airplanes that hit the two twin towers of the World Trade Center were both out of Boston. That was a description of what happened to Flight 11, which was the first one to come into the towers. And just looking at the timing, it's interesting. The plane took off at exactly 8 o'clock from Logan Airport in Boston, and it was at 8:28 that it took that hard left-hand turn and then crashed into the World Trade Center at about 8:45. So that means for 17 minutes, some air traffic controller had to know that they had a rogue aircraft on their hands heading for New York City. The other flight, the one that went into the second World Trade Center, and that was United Flight 175, a 767 that had taken off for Boston for Los Angeles, took off at 8:15. Then just after it passed the Massachusetts-Connecticut border heading west, just south of Pittsfield, Massachusetts, the flight took a 30-degree turn to the south, left toward New Jersey, then another 90-degree turn. It was heading toward Atlantic City, and then it took another hard turn northeast, basically doing a U-turn over New Jersey, and slammed into the to the building at 9:03. So again, for a considerable period of time, the air traffic controllers had to know that they had not one but two rogue aircrafts heading for New York.
Thanks, Charlie, very much. Now we want to go to Washington. I think it's Washington because the Attorney General, John Ashcroft, is about to make a public appearance in the White House press room with the man, of course, responsible for the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Today, America has experienced one of the greatest tragedies ever witnessed on our soil. These heinous acts of violence are an assault on the security of our nation. They are an assault on the security and the freedom of every American citizen. We will not tolerate such acts. We will expend every effort and devote all the necessary resources to bring the people responsible for these acts, these crimes, to justice. Now is the time for us to come together as a nation to offer our support, our prayers for victims and for their families, for the rescue workers, for law enforcement officials, for every one of us that has been changed forever by this horrible tragedy. The following is a summary of the known facts surrounding today's incidents. American Airlines Flight 11 departed Boston for Los Angeles, hijacked by suspects armed with knives. This plane crashed into the World Trade Center. United Airlines Flight 175 departed Boston for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 77 departed Washington Dulles for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the Pentagon. United Airlines Flight 93 departed Newark for San Francisco, was hijacked and crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Crime scenes have been established by the federal authorities in New York, in Washington, D.C. area, in Pittsburgh, in Boston, and in Newark. The full resources of the Department of Justice, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the U.S. Attorney's offices, the U.S. Marshals Service, the Bureau of Prisons, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Office of Justice Programs are being deployed to investigate these crimes and to assist survivors and victim families. Thousands of FBI agents in all of the field offices across the country and in the international Legat offices, assisted by personnel from other Department of Justice agencies, are cooperating in this investigation. The FBI has established a website where people can report any information about these crimes. That address is www.ifccfbi.gov. That address again, www.ifccfbi.gov. Individuals can report any information they know about these crimes to that website. It takes courage for individuals to come forward in situations like this, and I urge anyone with information that may be useful and helpful to authorities to use this opportunity. The Office of Victims of Crime has established a toll-free 800 number for family and friends of victims. They can call 800-331-0075 to leave contact information for a future time when more information is available, to find out information about a victim, or to find out information about the rights of victims and the services available to victim survivors and victim families. The determination of these terrorists will not deter the determination of the American people. We are survivors, and freedom is a survivor. A free American people will not be intimidated, nor will we be defeated. We will find the people responsible for these cowardly acts, and justice will be done. Tommy.
On Ashcroft. And this is Tommy Thompson,
Every
the
single
Secretary of
American
Health and Human Services.
Lost something today. And every one of us at this time expresses our deepest sympathy to the victims of today's tragedies and their families. It is now our mission to begin the healing from this tragedy. From the moment that we learned of these attacks, the Department of Health and Human Services has begun readying teams and resources to be sent to New York City and the Washington area to meet any needs of state and local officials. So far, we have sent 4 disaster medical teams to New York City, and 3 of these disaster medical teams to the Washington, Northern Virginia, Baltimore area. These medical teams each consist of about 35 physicians, nurses, and emergency medical technicians. They are all trained to deal with traumatic injuries and other emergency needs. We've also sent 4 disaster mortuary operational response teams to New York and 3 to the greater Washington area. We're also in the process of shipping a great deal of emergency medical supplies to New York City with the help of the Centers for Disease Control. In short, we're making the full force of the Department of Health and Human Services, both its resources and medical expertise available to the areas that need our assistance. We've also this afternoon activated the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps, which consists of approximately 6,000 health professionals. We also are giving backup assistance to the 500-bed ship Comfort from the United States Navy. Americans all over are calling up and asking what they can do. The best thing they can do is respond to this great call by volunteering to give blood. We need Americans to continue to answer that call. No matter where you live, please do your civic duty and assist us by donating blood. It is our primary job is to make sure Americans harmed by this tragedy get the help that they need. We will remain in constant contact with the governors, the mayors, public health officials, and other local officials to make sure that all their needs are being met. It is a sad day, but America and all of its citizens certainly share tonight in the grief that has been caused. And as the president and everybody in his administration have said, we, the government, will continue to operate and continue to provide the services to all Americans.
Well, it is important for the country. This is, let's just come away from the White House for just a moment, for a second now, and just inadvertently, we get from, it's so important at this point to hear from the representatives of government. Here are the leaders of the Senate and the House of Representatives together. The Speaker of the House in the middle, Dennis Hastert, Tom Daschle, the Senate leader, to his left.
At a time like this, no words that we should utter today or this evening can help the hearts and souls and feelings of the victims and the families that were a part of this great tragedy that happened in this country today. Our prayers and thoughts and words of consolation goes out to all those who have suffered. But one thing that happens here in this place is when American suffers and when people perpetrate acts against this country, we as a Congress and as a government stand united, and we stand together. Senators and House members, Democrats and Republicans will stand shoulder to shoulder to fight this evil that's been perpetrated on this nation. We will stand together to make sure that those who have brought forth this evil deed will pay the price. We're not sure who this is yet. But we have our suspicions. And when that is justified and when those suspicions are justified, we will act. We will stand with the president, we will stand with this government, and we will stand as Americans together through this time. Thank you.
Applause from the politicians for one another, almost willing themselves to stand shoulder to shoulder in a nonpartisan way. This is Tom Daschle, the Democratic leader of the Senate.
Despicable acts were an assault on our people and on our freedom. As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened by these horrific and cowardly acts. Congress will convene tomorrow. And we will speak with one voice to condemn these attacks, to comfort the victims and their families, to commit our full support to the effort to bring those responsible to justice. We, Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, stand strongly united behind the president and will work together to ensure that the full resources of the government are brought to bear in these efforts. Our heartfelt thoughts and our fervent prayers are with the injured and the families of those who have been lost.
We know as a nation, as we said, our thoughts and prayers are with those families and those injured and those who are the casualties of today's attack. We also remember those thousands of people who are rescue workers. We'd ask now that we all bow our heads in a moment of silence and remembrance. Thank you.
So, brief remarks from the political leadership, both Republican and Democrat, on the Hill today, and many members of Congress, both the House and the Senate, including Senator Lott just leaving the camera, I think hugging Barbara Mikulski, Democratic.
Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above, from the mountains to the prairies, to the ocean, white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God
Well, I do not know. I do not know whether that was a spontaneous gesture, but whether it was or was not. To see members of the House and the Senate, men and women, hugging each other in the face of this attack on the country, standing together on the steps of the Capitol on the evening of the 11th day of the month, 9th month of the year, singing God Bless America, surely reflects some heartfelt attempt by the members of the Congress to say to the world that this is a unified nation in the face of tragedy, as it has, for the most part, always been thus. A couple of very important numbers and website things have just been talked about by former Senator John Ashcroft, now the head of the Justice Department, the Attorney General of the United States. And I want to just read them out a little, one more time slowly, because they're important. The first, as the Justice Department in general and all of the intelligence agencies, led by the FBI in this case, begin to troll for information as to who may have perpetrated these acts of terror and horror, the Attorney General offers a website. If you have a pencil or a pen, it's www.ifccfbi.gov. As I expected someone to make a graphic. Thank you very much. And this is a telephone number coming now, which I think many people in the country will have been desperate to hear. It's the first time we've heard it today. This is a victims of crime hotline, which the government has established, and it is 1-800-331-0075. 1-800-331-0075. And this is particularly for people who may have had family, primarily for family, relatives, who they fear for in either the attacks on the trade tower or at this point, as we know, in the Pentagon, because we haven't had a number from the Pentagon yet, and certainly on the aircraft, on which 266 lives, we estimate, were lost today. To call in, leave a contact number, and then somebody will get back to you. And that'll be one of those hellish waits that people have to go through when they know or suspect that they're relatives. And we've been getting messages here from people all over the world at the moment who believe they had a relative or contact, particularly a relative, involved in the violence of today. Getting dark in New York City, of course. It's about 7:30 Eastern Time. The days are getting shorter everywhere in the country. We want to try to give you a little bit of a sense of the country now in two reports that we have prepared for World News Tonight, and clearly didn't get on because so much was happening at the moment. The first is from Erin Hayes, who's our correspondent based in Atlanta, and this is what she finds today, if one could call it the mood of the South that she has discovered.
Read all about it.
There is, rippling across this country,
Suicide bombers, suicide bombers.
great fear tonight. This attack was on every American.
I can't believe it. And it's so sad that it's come to this.
The first thing I thought of this morning when I saw that was Hiroshima, Pearl Harbor, all over again. The horror of it. And thinking that we're headed for World War III.
I want to go home to my family right now. That's what I want to do, get close to my kids.
We were seeing things we have never seen before, not just on our TV sets, but signs all around that this is as serious as it gets. At the airports is where it was most obvious, the national confusion.
I'm really scared. I feel helpless.
Paralysis.
All the lines on the cell phones are all busy.
Planes making their way to the first airport in sight. Unloaded passengers stunned to find themselves in places they had no plans to be, unsure what to do.
I'm just totally shook up right now because we were in the air when it happened. We're not told anything about it.
They said good luck, sleep in the airport.
And in city after city, anxious officials evacuated one building after another.
Our boss just finally came and told us, just go ahead and leave.
Not because of actual threats, but because no one knew what might be next.
There is a war here now.
We are a nation now on high alert, not just militarily, but psychologically, shaken on every level.
Just waiting.
For what?
To see if anything else is going to happen. To see if we're going to be attacked here in Atlanta.
It's a very strange feeling to be so threatened.
The uncertainty set in motion a wave of shutting down across the nation. Not just the obvious government buildings, but malls in Georgia and theme parks in Florida.
Due to unforeseen circumstances, the Magic Kingdom is now closing.
And schools everywhere.
Our military at home and around the world.
And in those classrooms still in session, you could hear the anxiety of the youngest generations, for whom this kind of attack had been limited to their history lessons until today.
They hit the Pentagon. It's a slap in the face. It's the nerve center of our military, and they hit the Pentagon? What is that?
I always thought America was like my superhero, like nothing could harm America. I mean, America is everyone's defender.
This is an attack on our generation. It is an attack on our culture, our system, our values, what we do.
There is a growing sense tonight that what we do now will truly define us as a nation.
I'd hate to see panic, because then whoever did this will win, and we can't let them win.
We are Americans, and I'm glad I am an American. We need, we just need to come together, and I think we will.
It will take that and much more in the coming days to see the nation, the entire nation, through this.
Head that way.
Erin Hayes, ABC News, Atlanta.
One never thinks of a citizen as being an ordinary citizen, but from those citizens, three expressions at least which are worth holding. The young man who said it's a slap at the face of the Pentagon, he couldn't imagine it. The young person who said it's an attack on our culture and our country and our military. It's not really hard to say it's an attack on the American culture because there's so many cultures here at the moment, but I think you know what he means. And young people who just couldn't believe that they were seeing what they were going to witness today. But as everybody in the country has experienced today, this is a new reality for the United States. We saw it first in Oklahoma City. We've seen it in any number of threats and the growing security that has been involved with our public life in the last several years, but nothing like this. So now go to California, where a similar report for us today from ABC's David Wright.
In Minnesota, the Mall of America never opened today. In Chicago, Navy Pier and the Lincoln Park Zoo were closed. In Orlando, even the Magic Kingdom was shut down. Just about any place in America where large numbers of people were likely to gather locked the doors and sent people home.
Nothing's going to get done today. It's going to be a miserable day.
With all of the nation's airliners grounded, thousands of travelers were stranded.
I'd probably feel safer in Europe if I could actually get over there right now.
It's horrible, and as Americans, we're totally unprepared for that. We just don't think that terrorism is going to hit in our backyard.
In Los Angeles, grief counselors were brought in to meet with family members of the 3 Los Angeles-bound planes that were hijacked and used by the terrorists. In San Francisco, one of the few planes left in the skies, a flight from Thailand, was escorted in by fighter jets.
I'm really scared. I feel helpless.
The workday routine was disrupted the country over, and rush hour extended through most of the day as people struggled to get home or just someplace they perceived to be safer. In Denver, people did what they could for the victims thousands of miles away. The blood banks were full of people eager to give. Here in LA, the entertainment industry has shut down production. Madonna canceled one of the final concerts of her national tour. The Latin Grammy Awards, scheduled for tonight, and the Emmys, scheduled for Sunday, are postponed indefinitely. And across the country, Major League Baseball has canceled its entire schedule. The disruption is likely to continue for at least a few days. Financial markets will remain closed through tomorrow, and the post office says the U.S. mail will be slowed, but will keep coming.
From California on another part of the country, from Minnesota out to the west. There are no time zones in the country today. One thing that David Wright mentioned there about baseball canceling game, this is the first time since the D-Day invasion that Major League Baseball has canceled all of its game. The first time since D-Day in the Second World War that Major League Baseball has canceled all of its game. I was very struck earlier today by what David McCullough, the noted and popular and wise historian said when he said it's warfare 21st century style, and reminding all of us in the country who listen and read him that we haven't seen such destruction as this on our home ground, as he put it, since the Civil War. And one girl in that report saying, of course, Americans in many cases are just simply not prepared for this. ABC's Dean Reynolds is in Chicago today. And Dean, I don't quite understand what it is you have, and we'll come back to the mood of Chicago in just a moment, but there was another incident involving a plane today.
That's right, Peter. They didn't know it at the time, but the pilot and all of the passengers aboard TWA flight number 3, bound from New York's John F. Kennedy Airport to St. Louis, came perilously close to one of those planes that crashed into the World Trade Center. So close that New York Air Control told the TWA jet to take evasive action to avoid a collision.
You dodged one of the aircraft that hit the tower?
Well, he was up there whenever we were coming from New York, so what we had to do was, they were not talking to him, and he was changing his heading and his altitude, so they just cleared us to deviate however we had to stay away from him.
It was right after they had taken off, and the passengers were horrified.
I thought we were going to crash. I thought the plane was going to crash, because when we took off, the plane kind of went down and came back up, it was kind of shaking. And it wasn't your normal taking off routine. And then you could just see like a plane that just kind of just bypassed us really close. And I said maybe it was just a mere miss.
We had him in sight, so it was a nice day in New York. We were out of the clouds, which helped a lot. So we just, dodged him.
As the TWA jet ascended, others aboard said they could see a terrible sight below.
Then when we got really high up, my brother's a fireman, and so I said, doesn't it look like the Trade Center's on fire? And he says, yeah, it does. It looks like a big fire.
Now, the passengers told us, Peter, that after consulting with the pilot, the flight attendants pushed the food trays up against the cockpit door, apparently to guard against a possible hijacking. In any event, the plane continued on uneventfully until it was ordered to land at Dayton, Ohio, and it landed safely.
Stay with me for just 1 second, Dean, because if you weren't with this all day, there was a time this morning when the Federal Aviation Administration, first of all, didn't allow anybody to take off, and then ordered all planes in the air over the United States to land immediately at the nearest airport, which was how a plane which begins in New York and is going west ends up in Dayton, Ohio. Dean, now can we just talk a little bit about Illinois and the central part of the country? One of the very first things that happened today was the Sears Tower in Chicago was closed. What else happened there, and what other sense of that part of the country do you now have?
Well, I got to O'Hare Airport shortly after the attack on the World Trade Center, and of course, it was basically a ghost town, except for everybody standing outside the airport waiting to get cabs elsewhere because nothing was going out of the airport. When I got into town, again, there were very few pedestrians. It was almost all police walking along the sidewalks, checking all of the state, federal, county buildings to see if there were any bombs. The police were checking to see if there were any missing buses or trucks. It was very tense here. Now, as the day has progressed, it looks as though life is returning to normal here, at least in Chicago, in the Loop area.
Thanks very much, Dean Reynolds in Chicago. We'll come back to you just to give you again some sense of the magnitude of this. The Reuters news agency reporting out of Toronto tonight makes the point that the tarmacs of airports all across Canada, from Vancouver in the west to Goose Bay in Labrador, jumping off spot if you're going to Europe, are crowded with aircraft which are either moving back and forth across the United States or across Canada or going to or from Europe. We're just all told to land. And so in all of those airports tonight, there is a huge number of aircraft, and the FAA is simply going to keep them on the ground at least for the next 12 hours and maybe longer. There was a passenger on a Northwest Airlines flight which was bound for Detroit and which was ordered by the FAA or their company to divert to Vancouver. The captain on board told the people that there was a mechanical problem. It wasn't a great issue, but they're going to Vancouver. When they got on the ground, he apologized to them for lying to them under the circumstances. It seems like the obvious thing to do. But all domestic flights in Canada were canceled as airports were closed down because nobody had the vaguest idea whether or not there was something else going on up there. And earlier today, you may recall that we heard the British Prime Minister, Tony Blair, talking about this, and it wasn't long before he, I don't know of any other European city involved, but certainly he ordered that aircraft should not be allowed to fly in the airspace over London. And so this was repeated time and time and time again in a variety of places. But in just one place, St. John's International Airport in Newfoundland, which is a pretty small place, has taken in 27 aircraft today with 5,000 passengers. That may be St. John's, New Brunswick. I'm not altogether sure it's St. John's, Newfoundland, St. John's, New Brunswick. And it may be either in New Brunswick. But you just get some sense of aircraft just being ordered to bail out from wherever they're going and to get on the ground. John Nance, our aviation analyst, is with us. And John, it's probably you should be talking much more about this than I am. But add some more to this general overall air crisis today.
The only time, Peter, that we have ever in our history, certainly in the jet age, ever had a situation in which jetliners were parked all over the place was in the air traffic control strike of 1981, when we had basically a cessation of services by most of the air traffic controllers, but not all of them. Even then, there were still flights flying. This is unprecedented except for that time in history, and even going back into the latter days after World War II, I'm not aware of any time that we put all the air traffic on the ground.
John, I'm just looking at how widespread this is. It says here 34 flights were diverted to Vancouver, 25 were diverted to Toronto. One was diverted to Whitehorse, which is in the Canadian Yukon, in the Yukon. And after the plane reported communications and fuel difficulty. This must have just been the most, we know what we're dealing with in terms of tragedy and casualty and chaos, but it must have just been an unbelievable day for the aviation authorities.
Well, totally chaotic in every possible way. One thing that we can be very thankful for is that a number of years ago, the FAA established a central control system, which is now housed in Herndon, Virginia. It's like a mission control. We've actually, we had cameras there on New Year's Eve back there on the Millennium. But this gives us the capability of coordinating all the air traffic control centers, all the control towers throughout North America, and being able to shut the system down. But imagine the air crews on those flight decks trying to get an idea of why in the world they're being told to land someplace other than their destination. The confusion factor there alone has got to be horrendous, especially the fact that when you're told to land at any suitable airport, not every airliner can land everywhere, and there are a lot of decisions that have to be made very rapidly.
John, when
the air traffic...
My apologies, I'm terribly sorry, go on.
No, all I was saying was that the radio traffic that has to occur between the pilots and their company to find out where in the world the dispatcher wants you to go, that alone was a monstrous problem, certainly for American and Delta and United and all the big airlines.
Now, you're a pilot, a commercial pilot as well, flown for major airlines, Alaska Airways, as I recall.
That's right.
You're a commercial pilot in an aircraft today. Does your company tell you from the ground that not one but 2 and perhaps 3 aircraft in the country have been hijacked? And what do you do then?
I really am going to be interested to know whether or not that information was passed that way. Usually you're just given a command and not told the reason why, because there's too much concern that broadcasting that out over radio frequencies may somehow exacerbate the problem. You know, you're in unknown territory, but I would imagine that there were enough out there who were told that the level of tension was very high.
John,
certainly you're going to be looking at your door.
When we heard that one case of the drinks trolley being brought up and pushed against the cabin door by the members of the crew of one particular aircraft because they clearly had some sense of what was going on. John, what have you managed to learn throughout the day in terms of the aircraft which ultimately were crashed with that enormous loss of life? Anything to add there?
Well, only this, Peter. We touched on it briefly before, and that is the tantalizing clue, if you will, that we have 2 Boeing 757s and 2 Boeing 767s, and those are subject to what we call a common type rating. In other words, if you're trained in one, you can fly the other. Boeing built them that way to minimize training differentials in the airline business. Perhaps that's simply coincidental, and perhaps it's very pointed here in terms of how this was planned. These aircraft, too, when you consider the amount of fuel that was on board transatlantic or transcontinental flights, And we have to consider that there's a high probability that these flights were selected because they would have a lot of fuel, you wouldn't have to put extra explosives on, and you could create a flying bomb that not only involves 300 to 400,000 pounds with a kinetic energy of 200 to 250 knots or greater, but also the, not explosive, but the burning power, incendiary power of all that fuel, which we saw do these horrible things in the Trade Center case.
So as you look at these events today, these two events, which are really three events, which are really four events if you consider the fourth crash.
Yes, indeed, four.
And the amount of fuel and the explosive power, as we certainly saw at the Pentagon and at the trade towers, do you think anybody would have needed to take additional explosives on board? There was enough explosion potential in the gasoline itself.
I think I wouldn't be surprised when we finally get this unraveled, Peter, if there was a structural engineer on the other side of the world that had been very much involved in planning this. Because those decisions would have involved what does it take to bring down that structure in each particular case. I think that this was probably something not left to chance, but it also is a very wise thing if you're going to do a hellacious act like this to figure, well, we don't have to put additional explosives in. We make the airplane a flying bomb simply by which one we select.
Thank you very much, John Nance, and we shall come back to you. What we're looking at here, of course, is a videotape from a variety of different angles today. All of it just repeatedly bringing home the horror of the attack on the trade towers. We did not see the aircraft. We've seen no evidence of any video of the aircraft actually hitting the Pentagon. It came from the south. We do know that the people on board were aware they'd been hijacked because the wife of the Solicitor General of the United States, the administration's lawyer, basically, argues cases before the Supreme Court, was on board one of them and died, of course, along with all of the other people, and describes a pretty horrifying circumstances of being aware that they had been made hostages, no longer passengers. And we also had an eyewitness report from the vicinity of the Pentagon earlier today, which said the aircraft came in very low, and it had to come in very low because the Pentagon's only a 6-story building, John McWethy told us at the Pentagon, and was knocking off lampposts, or sorry, power posts, telephone posts, as it came up from the south to attack that. In the middle, I want to talk to our medical editor, Dr. Tim Johnson, about how great the need may really be for this disaster tonight in medical terms. The Attorney General has been talking about it. First, I want to go to Midtown and ABC, Midtown, New York City, that is, and ABC's Diane Sawyer. Diane?
Peter, I don't know how much you can see down here, but we have heavy mobilization. We have cranes coming in. We have bulldozers, generators, lights coming in because, of course, city power is out. I'm told they're coming in part to uncover the rubble from a subway station that partially collapsed. Also, they're going to take a look at the rubble closer up. If you can move the camera in, you can see the gray haze, which is the smoke from what is still burning. Not only the rubble of the 2 tall towers this morning that were blasted, but also that third building, the 47-story Tishman building, which had been evacuated. And then we're told that the Marriott Hotel is still on fire, but firefighters have given up on that right now. So right now, building's still on fire. Everybody evacuated down there. I'm going to bring in Don Baylor once more for a couple of footnotes into this scene, Peter, because he's been walking the streets all day.
Ask him to
Don,
speak
you
up.
saw a jet engine. You saw a turbine engine.
Yeah, it was obviously an engine from a large jet that is over on the left-hand side about 2 blocks down this way. It landed on what I think was a phone booth, but it was charred. Obviously, the insides, it did not have the outer shell anymore, but it looked like the inner workings of a jet engine.
And again, we're talking blocks and blocks away, Peter, so imagine the trajectory of that engine's flight. Another thing you told me, which has such a poignancy to it, you said when you walked the scene up at the Trade Center devastation, that you were knee-deep in a carpet of financial documents.
Right. Well, we were talking about the implications of this on world markets, this being probably the center of the world of finance, and that was nowhere was that more dramatically demonstrated than what were millions and millions of documents. I looked at financial documents, stock certificates, employment records, just lying around. Many of them were charred. It's obvious. And when you saw the explosion, you saw a cascade of paper come off these buildings, and that's what it was.
We're told it's as far away as 3 miles, Peter. And I should just say that every time you stop here, someone comes up from the EMS or from the firefighters and the police just to tell you the names of people they know who went in before them and they're not sure came out.
Thanks very much, Diane Sora. I must tell you, for the future, it's very hard to hear you down there because of the emergency equipment that's working in Midtown. I'm sure your engineers will tell you if we could move you just a little bit away from that, we'd like very much to hear clearly as we can, obviously, under the circumstances, what you are saying. Just thinking for a second there about the thousands of people who are outside the country, when you think that one airport in Eastern Canada had 27 aircraft and 5,000 people, and it's happening all the way across the continent, people stranded tonight. And one assumes, though, the cell phone network in the United States, at least today, certainly in the Eastern United States, was jammed with people trying to make calls related to this incident, the press, government officials, emergency officials. One assumes, because we haven't got any phone numbers for you, I'm afraid, of people in other places tonight who are expected to be somewhere else, and they all appear, as far as we can tell by the reporting that we're getting from a variety of places, are okay. They're just spending a night in some place they did not intend to be. We've had a couple of chances today to talk to Jerry Hauer, who is the man who set up New York City's emergency headquarters on the west side of Manhattan, right down there by the trade towers, which is no longer usable today because it was, if not one of the first, one of the early victims of these two extraordinary collapses of the two trade tower buildings. But he's with us again tonight. Jerry, grateful that you came back. You just tell us what you know that's going on.
Well, there's a massive effort underway right now, Peter, to get medical resources into the city. As you heard earlier, Secretary Thompson has mobilized a number of Department of Health and Human Services, DMAT teams, DMORT teams, which are the mortuary teams. They are bringing in the Comfort, which is a naval ship that is a hospital ship that will help provide resources and much-needed beds. Joe Albaugh, the director of FEMA, is coordinating the federal government's effort to assist the city and Washington, D.C., and there will be numerous urban search and rescue teams coming into the city to aid with dogs, with search equipment, to aid New York City's firefighters, because clearly this is going to be a long-term operation. Our firefighters here in the city, our police and emergency medical services have been absolutely heroic today in their efforts. A number of them have become victims in the process today in trying to rescue people in these buildings, and the fatigue will set in, but they are the consummate professionals. They will do everything they can to continue to try and search for victims, but there will come a point very soon where once the fire is out, they will start to pick through the rubble.
Jerry? Let me interrupt you and even be more specific, if I may. Mike Carter is the vice president of the Firefighters Union, estimates that half of the 400 firefighters who first reached the scene at the trade tower may be dead. And here's what he says: we have entire companies that are just missing. We have lost chiefs. And Cardinal Edward Egan, the Roman Catholic cardinal in New York City, who administered the last rites to a dozen victims, said the firefighters and the police were dead in great numbers. Now, I don't mean to reach out for numbers except to quantify the scope of this disaster, much of which we can see on our face. But what can you add to those two comments?
Well, first of all, many of those people, the chiefs that I heard on the radio as I was listening to this evolve are very close personal friends. Many of the police officers, the emergency service unit, these are the people that were the first responders, the first two rescue units, the first two fire units. We're all in the building either doing rescues or firefighting, and they transmitted a third alarm almost immediately, which is upwards of 150 to maybe 200 firefighters, and then they rapidly brought in more resources. They transmitted a fifth alarm and then an additional fifth alarm. So there were hundreds and hundreds of firefighters and police officers trying to save the people in those buildings. And to try and quantify it at this point, how many people?
No, I didn't mean to make you do that. I just want to know whether or not you you were aware of what the head of the Firefighters Union in Cardinal Legan has said in terms of the dimension of the disaster for the fire department.
Absolutely, and some very, very senior people in the fire department are missing.
I'm Laura Diaz with Mark Brown. We continue to cover this breaking story. As you know, today has been a catastrophic day for Americans everywhere as the most extreme terrorist act ever committed on U.S. soil has occurred. We know now, the facts that we do know have been repeated again and again: 4 hijacked planes, 2 going into the World Trade Center, 1 into the Pentagon, another one landing outside of Pittsburgh. And Mark, we do know too at this point that there have been some Southern Californians on board those planes.
Indeed, Laura, this is the greatest loss of life in an attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor, and it is expected that the casualties will dwarf those of Pearl Harbor, and the vast majority of those will have been civilians. A number of those coming from Southern California. 3 out of the 4 flights involved were bound for Los Angeles, and they never made it.
You were looking at a live shot there of New York City. It is now dark. Of course, the events today began at about 8:45 their time. A horrible, horrible set of events as some 266 people on board 4 hijacked aircraft, all presumed to be dead. We know now that there were 4 flights, Flight 11, American Airlines, Boston to LAX, 81 passengers, 11 crew members on board. We know that there was 1 local victim, 41-year-old Edmund Glazer, who is dead. Also, there's a new information coming into Eyewitness News. United Airlines Flight 175, 2 scouts from the LA Kings on board there. We are told that they are 31-year-old Mark Bavis and 53-year-old Ace Bailey.
Okay, and those were 2. That was the one that that was the second plane into the World Trade Center. Let's go out now to New York and reporter John Berman, who is live there now. We are expecting the president to speak, I should mention. Now let's go to John Berman.
Mark, I don't know if you can see it in the dark, but behind me in the night sky, the smoke is still rising from the World Trade Center. About 2 hours ago, a 3rd building of the World Trade Center complex did collapse. It has been simply a horrifying day in New York City.
It began just before 9 a.m. American Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles crashed into one of the twin towers of the World Trade Center. Then, 10 minutes later, the second plane, a United flight also from Boston to Los Angeles, crashed into the second tower. The twin towers, a symbol of American economic power, stood wounded in the morning sky. Then, they stood no more.
We saw a shadow, it looked like a plane. Next thing we know, it was boom, boom, and the floor started shaking. And then we saw debris fall down, and next thing we know, we had to get out of the building.
It was like a comet just hit the earth.
Just after 10 o'clock, as thousands of terrified people watched from the streets, the South Tower collapsed. 20 minutes later, the second tower came down. Some 50,000 people work in the 2 towers at any given time. Evacuations began immediately after the first crash, and many were able to get out. But thousands of people are feared dead. On the streets of Lower Manhattan, it was mayhem. At local hospitals, the wounded started to pour in. A makeshift morgue was being set up on a Hudson River pier. Firefighters and law enforcement streamed to the scene, or as close as they could get. Many firefighters could be among the victims.
Today is obviously one of the most difficult days in the history of the city and the country. The tragedy that we're all undergoing right now is something that we've had nightmares about.
Just as the towers were falling, yet another plane, a United Airlines flight from Newark to San Francisco, crashed in western Pennsylvania. All the flights appear to have been hijacked. Government sources say that on the American flight that crashed in New York, a flight attendant called the operations center saying 2 flight attendants were stabbed and the assailants had broken into the flight deck.
The mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, has said that tomorrow Lower Manhattan will be closed. No one will be allowed in so they can begin the investigation and the cleanup. The rest of the city will remain open, but the mayor has asked if people can take the day off, that they do take the day off. It will be a long, long time before this great city comes back to anything close to normal. This is John Berman live in New York. Back to you.
All right, John, thank you for that. We should mention again, President Bush is expected to address the nation very shortly, and when he does, we'll bring that to you live. As a result of today's terrorist attacks, the New York City skyline has been dramatically altered.
We have an opportunity to bring you more gripping images of the devastating scene as one of the World Trade Towers collapsed. Our team coverage continues with Eyewitness News reporter Lori Shore. She is live in Hoboken, New Jersey, right across the Hudson River from Manhattan. Lori?
Mark and Laura, I'm reporting live from Frank Sinatra Park, where hundreds have spent an eerie day. The park is lined with benches that normally afford people a 180-degree view of the Hudson River behind me and the once familiar New York City skyline. Not tonight. As you can see, darkness has replaced the area where the World Trade Center towers once soared twice as high as the adjacent skyscrapers. A gaping hole now left by this disaster. An amazing vantage point here. Another, probably even more dramatic vantage point was captured earlier today. I'm joined now by Jeff Simmons. He's a New York City reporter. Excuse me. You and your photographer were just 2 blocks away from the South Tower as it collapsed this morning. We've got video we're going to roll for you of what you saw. Describe to me what you experienced.
We were at the corner of Chambers and West. At that point, that's right about 2 blocks from the Twin Towers. We heard the rumble. We saw people start to run, collapsed right onto the highway at that point. Dozens of people running towards us. I mean, you knew there were people that were trapped underneath that rubble at that point, caked in debris, caked in dust, running back towards us. My cameraman pulled the car around. I jumped out, shot this footage while people ran. At that point, as they realized we needed to put back the media, anyone who was over there, a school right there, they started to evacuate the children. Hundreds of kids walking out of that school uptown headed north. We caught on video thousands of people at one point.
And Jeff, what terrified you the most at that moment?
The fact that we were so close, we didn't know if we were going to survive this, because at that point, once it fell to the ground, there was the giant cloud of smoke that could have suffocated us.
Will you ever look at your job the same way again?
It's difficult. I mean, I've been to so many crime scenes, and in this one, you realize that nearly everyone in this city has probably been touched by this in some way, that we all probably know someone who's been hurt, injured, or killed today.
Thank you, Jeff. In fact, that segues right into what I was going to talk about next, and that is the mood here at Sinatra Park. Probably the best way to describe it is the one-sided cell phone calls I hear again and again. They go something like this. Hello? Yes, I'm alive. Reporting live here in New Jersey, Lori Shore, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Back to you two.
All right, a lot of conversations like that taking place. Lori, thank you. In the wake of these attacks, President Bush is finally back at the White House. We saw him arrive live here on ABC 7 a while ago. For most of the day, the president's exact location has been kept top secret. He started the day flying out of Florida, but then made a stop in Louisiana and later on in Nebraska. This morning, he gave an emotional address from Barksdale Air Force Base near Shreveport, Louisiana.
Make no mistake. The United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test.
We expect President Bush to address the nation very shortly. We will bring the president's address to you live when it happens.
All 4 of the hijacked planes were headed to California, 3 en route to LAX, the 4th to San Francisco. As we've watched in horror today, none of them made it to their destinations. For more on that part of the story, let's go to our colleague Michelle Tuesday live in the Eyewitness Newsroom. Michelle?
Laura, we weren't a direct target this morning, but we certainly were an indirect target in that many of the casualties were Californians, people who were on board those 4 aircraft heading to California when they crashed this morning. 266 people in total died. 3 of the flights were headed to LAX. All of them departed between 8 and 8:30 this morning, and all had crashed by 10 a.m. We're going to take a look now at those individual flights. American Airlines Flight 11 left Boston this morning, was headed to Los Angeles. It had 81 passengers, 11 crew members on board. That is the plane that crashed into the World Trade Center's North Tower at 8:45 a.m. American Flight 77, a Boeing 757 with 58 passengers, 6 crew members on board, crashed into the Pentagon at 9:40 a.m. United Flight 175 left Boston en route to LAX, a Boeing 767. It had 56 passengers, 7 flight attendants, 2 pilots. That plane crashed into the World Trade Center South Tower at 9:03 this morning. And United Flight 93 left Newark for San Francisco, never made it. The Boeing 757 had 38 passengers, 7 crew members, and that flight crashed about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh at about 10 o'clock this morning. Many Californians were among the casualties, and in an effort to help their families cope with their loss and also to address any questions they may have, the airlines have set up hotline numbers. The American Airlines number is 1-800-245-0999. The United number, 1-800-932-8555. Now, these numbers are set up only for people who have lost loved ones or are concerned that they had a loved one on board. If you have other general questions not related to those flights, we have other hotlines that you can call. If you have safety concerns, if you need reassurance or peace of mind, you can call in LA County 1-888-356-4661, and in Orange County, the safety hotline number is 1-714-628-7085. We have another number to show you. This is the number for the American Red Cross. It is 1-800-448-3543. An easier way to remember it is 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. There is a great need for blood right now. You can use that number to find out about a blood donation center that's nearest you. They encourage people to call ahead and make an appointment. They have been swamped. There has been an outpouring of support in terms of blood donations. There have been lines estimated at 3 to 4 hours long, which is terrific, but it can also be a source of frustration if you are going down there this evening to donate blood. So the best thing to do is to call ahead and schedule an appointment. And also, just to let you know, these were a lot of phone numbers, and if you didn't have a chance to write them all down, we encourage you to visit our website at abc7.com for all that information. Laura, Mark, back to you.
Thank you very much. Michelle Tuzzi reporting live out of the newsroom. In the meantime, we continue to look at those live pictures coming out of New York City. A surreal feeling tonight as darkness falls over the city of New York, one of the premier cities in the entire world, brought to its knees today by what occurred this morning, Mark.
And yeah, still see the smoke rising out of the crater even now.
Perhaps Senator John Warner said it best. He said it was the most tragic hour in America's history. In the meantime, we are going to continue to put together the pieces of the puzzle here this evening in California. Even though today's terrorist attacks took place all the way across the country, there is a strong local connection.
As we have mentioned, 3 of the hijacked planes were headed to Los Angeles. We're getting word that one of the people on board one of those planes, American Airlines Flight 11, was David Angel, one of the producers of the sitcom Frasier, along with his wife Lynn. They were on board American Airlines Flight 11 that ended up hitting one of the twin towers of the World Trade Center. Eyewitness News reporter Steve Alvarez joins us live from Chatsworth with more. Steve.
Well, Mark, as you said, no doubt there are many, many people in Southern California tonight dealing with personal tragedies. But until a short time ago, we had not gotten the names of any victims. No passenger lists were released. The first name we got was that of Edmund Glazer. He worked here at MRV Communications, a small firm in Chatsworth. You can see over my shoulder, the employees have a wreath, a picture. There's a black bouquet on the door as they mourn his loss. Throughout the day, like the rest of us, they have watched this tragedy unfold, and they have tried to deal with his death. His is the first face that Southern Californians have been able to put on this terrorist tragedy. 41-year-old Edmund Glazer, a longtime resident of Woodland Hills. He was on one of 2 flights out of Boston that slammed into the Twin Towers in New York this morning. Video of that attack slammed home the reality of the tragedy for his friends and co-workers.
It brought everything home. I mean, terrorist is always, you can think the terrorist is always around the corner, but until it hits you, you really don't believe it. And here it is, and we've seen it on television. I mean, that second plane that crashed, I think, was Edmund's plane.
Edmunds worked for MRV Communications in Chatsworth. The company's CEO and longtime friend, Noam Lothan, is dealing with the fact that he was the reason Glazer was on that plane.
I actually asked Edmund Glazer to travel to Los Angeles today. You know, he called me yesterday, said, if you need me, I'll come. And I said, yes, Edmund, I need you.
Today, employees needed each other to lean on in dealing with Edmund's death. He had moved with his wife and son to Boston 2 years ago, but was still close to many here in Southern California.
It's very hard to accept right now, so it's only in times when you're by yourself that you can really face what's going on.
Diana Hayden was with Edmunds and other company officials exactly 1 month ago today, when ironically, in New York, Edmunds rang the bell on Wall Street celebrating his company's growth. 1 month later, celebration has turned to sorrow as this small company deals with the loss of a friend and the horror of his death playing out over and over again on television.
I really don't want to watch the clips anymore today because it's just very hard to watch them. So trying to avoid the TV for the most part today, at least, in terms of not seeing that.
And yet, like most of us, they have been glued to the television throughout the day because it almost seems impossible to believe that actually happened in New York this morning. Of course, all that is sinking in for all of us across the country. But for people like the folks here at MRV and others here in Southern California who have lost loved ones, the tragedy certainly hits home and is all too real for all of them. Live in Chatsworth, Steve Alvarez, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
All right, thank you, Steve. Hard to watch and harder still to believe. 2 members of the local sporting community are among the victims of today's horrific events.
Bill Weir joins us with those details. They were on their way back here to Southern California to come home in time to start camp. Didn't make it.
Didn't make it. The Los Angeles Kings are mourning the loss of 2 members of their organization. Director of Pro Scouting Ace Bailey and one of his assistants, Mark Bavis, were on board Flight 175, the second plane to crash into the World Trade Towers. Both were Boston area residents heading back to L.A. for tomorrow's start of training camp. A journeyman player and longtime scout, Bailey earned 7 Stanley Cup rings in his 31-year career. Former line mate Wayne Gretzky among those sending condolences to Bailey's wife and son. He was 53 years old. Bavis, aged 31, was a member of the amateur scouting staff. The Kings will hold a press conference a bit later this evening and may announce they are delaying the start of training camp. And speaking of delays, a decision on Sunday's NFL games will be made tomorrow, but all Major League Baseball games have been canceled tonight. The only other time that's happened on D-Day and to honor the death of Franklin D. Roosevelt, as if we need one more reminder of the magnitude of this day.
It is incredible. Bill, thank you. LAX and other local airports closed, of course, shortly after those terrorist attacks. Their terminals and streets virtually deserted.
And officials aren't saying when they'll be allowed to reopen. Our team coverage continues with Eyewitness News reporter Pablo Pereira live at LAX. Pablo.
Well, Laura, LAX serves approximately 2,200 flights and more than 175,000 passengers a day. But LAX is now a ghost town, shut down until further notice.
Despite no specific threats here at LAX, the FAA ordered the airport evacuated and shut down within minutes after the terrorist attacks in New York and Washington.
The FAA has taken the action to close all of the airports in the United States until further notice.
It's the first ever grounding of all flights in the U.S., in effect at LAX and the nation's 460 other airports until at least noon tomorrow Eastern Time.
LAX will remain closed until directed to reopen by the Federal Administration, the Aviation Administration, and until we are completely assured that it is safe to do so.
Roads leading in and out of LAX were shut down, and many planes found themselves stranded on runways. Airport police would not discuss security procedures, but all buildings and planes were to be inspected, one by one.
I'm confident that it is secure, and I think I can say that today. This is something that we do on a regular basis, although I can tell you the magnitude is very different, given what happened back east. But I think that, again, we're following established procedures, following training we've gone through over the years, and following, as has been mentioned before, long-established relationships with various agencies, and plans are kicking into place and doing very well.
Nearby, hundreds of LAPD officers mobilized, on alert and ready if needed. The FBI was also called in. To this point, no word of any threats to people or property in Southern California.
We have no information of any specific threats of LAX or any place in western United States or California. However, we had no information regarding New York or Washington, D.C.
Now, the last flight allowed into LAX was a Qantas Airlines international flight about 11:30 this morning. About 125 commercial aircraft are now grounded here. And again, the earliest LAX could reopen is at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, but the FAA stresses that is at the very earliest. Reporting live at LAX, Pablo Pereira, ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
Pablo, thank you so much for that update. Meantime, only essential offices of the California government were operational today. Governor Gray Davis says every state agency should be back to business as usual tomorrow. He spoke out this afternoon from a secured location just outside of the state capitol.
I have, as you know, lowered the state flag, and I want to urge all Californians to be calm, if they can, to spend this day with their family, and above all else, to say a prayer for the many victims of this dastardly act committed in New York and Washington. This may well prove to be the largest terrorist act ever on American soil. As you know, 3 and maybe 4 of the planes were headed to California and presumably include some California passengers. Our hearts and prayers go out to all the victims, no matter where they reside.
Governor Davis is also offering help to New York City officials in the form of 3 urban search and rescue teams. They should be arriving on the East Coast late tonight or early in the morning.
Well, Laura, like every other town and city across America, work stopped today in Los Angeles as people learned of the tragedy on the East Coast.
And as people tried to understand what was happening, only one thing was clear. This was an event beyond comprehension. We continue our coverage of the attack on America with Eyewitness News reporter Giovanna Lara in downtown Los Angeles. Giovanna?
Mark and Laura, it was an extremely quiet day here downtown. The Superior Courts and other government buildings closed before even many of the employees arrived. Then, one by one, many of the businesses that inhabit these high-rises behind me sent their employees home. We spoke to many of those people before they left the area, and there is no doubt they spent the day glued to their televisions.
Terrible. Everybody's terrified. Everyone's scared.
I'm just nauseated, actually. It's a little surreal, everything, the situation. It's kind of shocking.
Makes you kind of wonder if we're at war or not.
The mood very sober. People quietly evacuated their high-rise offices downtown. Many of them talked solemnly on their cell phones.
My closest friend in this world is in New York, and I can't get a hold of him right now.
One woman was overtaken by emotion when she learned of the attack. Her aunt worked at the World Trade Center, and there was still no word whether she escaped before the collapse.
Not many people made it out, unfortunately. And, I just can't imagine what it was like being trapped in those towers.
Within an hour, most of the downtown area had been evacuated. The courts closed, businesses shut down, the streets, usually bustling with traffic, were transformed into a virtual ghost town.
It's reminiscent of a war. I mean, it looked like what we saw of Berlin being bombed during World War II. I've never seen anything like it. You never thought living in this country that we could be subjected to this.
We have to pray that God would take care of them and strengthen them.
Now, people staying downtown were not evacuated, staying at the hotels, that is, and police say the people living in the area were not asked to leave. The area this afternoon is still quiet, and I want to show you one more thing. If we take a look over here to the Harbor Freeway, normally that freeway is backlogged with traffic. It is not so this afternoon. And one more thing, we are across the street from the Staples Center where the Madonna concert was scheduled for tonight. That concert has been canceled, and this parking lot that normally would be filling up with cars right now is empty. Reporting live from downtown, I'm Giovanna Lara, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Back to you, Mark and Laura.
Giovanna, thank you. President Bush has put all U.S. military around the world on its highest alert status.
And that includes the Marines at Camp Pendleton, just north of San Diego. Eyewitness News reporter John Gregory is live now from Camp Pendleton with the way things are there. John.
Well, Mark, you may be able to see the vehicles behind me, a long line of cars waiting to get into Camp Pendleton. It's going to be very slow going. Bases like this across the country, across the world, have been put on wartime alert, security extremely tight. The Marines here have been going from one vehicle to the next. They are going through trunks. They are going through bags, doing everything they can to ensure that no type of weapon or explosive device gets onto this base.
One by one, Marine guards check the cars at Miramar Air Station. Military officials call it Condition Delta. It is the highest state of readiness. Only essential military personnel are allowed on the base, and it has many Marines wondering what's next.
It's a scary thought. Just here on call, worried about what's going to happen, if we're going to go out. Worried about what's going on at home. I just got married 3 weeks ago, and I'm already leaving. Just a lot of mixed emotions, anxieties going on.
I just can't believe it. I can't. It's unbelievable. I am scared a little bit. Sure. Anybody should be.
At Camp Pendleton, barriers are being positioned as security is tightened. Bomb-sniffing dogs are also on patrol, and the military personnel are preparing themselves for the very worst.
I'm just grateful that we have this freedom, and I just want to keep it free. It's just, I feel it's my duty to do what we have to do in order to keep that going on.
And that is a common theme you hear here. A lot of Marines scared, nervous, but certainly ready to do whatever they are called upon to do. Once again, we are at Condition Delta. This is the same level of alert we saw during the Gulf War. It is the highest level of alert the military can put themselves on. And again, only essential military personnel are now being allowed onto this base and other bases across the country. We're live at Camp Pendleton. John Gregory, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Back to you, Mark Laura.
Thank you, John. LAX security was so tight that news crews were ordered off of the grounds, but one international flight did manage to land there. Its pilot had no choice.
And you can bet the people on board that plane, the passengers, had a lot to say about what happened today. We talked to some of them. Our live team coverage continues now with Eyewitness News reporter Philip Palmer at LAX. Philip.
Mark, I guess surreal is the best word to describe and the most common word to describe the experience at LAX. And the most telling sign right now is the silence. Normally, planes would be lined up, ready to land or take off, and instead you can see them across the way. They're just sitting there. Roads surrounding the airport have been blocked off. Just a moment ago, right on Sepulveda, I saw a cyclist riding down the middle of the street. It's a sight no one has seen before and has left many shaking their heads in disbelief. Monitors throughout the airport were an example of the magnitude of what has happened. The FAA grounded all air traffic across the country, leaving LAX police and the FBI to do the unimaginable. They shut down LAX. Many American Airlines passengers were left unsure of what to do, as were employees of the airline who knew few specifics of what had happened to their coworkers and were often left looking for a shoulder to cry on. Passengers scheduled to arrive or depart from here learned of the tragedy in New York and Washington, D.C., and were told to leave. The exit was confusing but orderly, many obviously shaken by the day's events.
When they said that the Pentagon was hit, that's when I said, we're not going. We're going home. I need to go home to my kids. I can't believe this is happening.
Anybody who reads the Bible knows these kinds of things are going to happen. But it's very disheartening to think of all the innocent lives that are taken when someone else has a goal or a menu or whatever they're trying to do. They have no concern for other people, and that really takes a lot out of you.
By 11 a.m., the airport was virtually empty until a flight from Australia landed here, and passengers were told that was only because they didn't have enough fuel to make it to Canada.
I think the uncertainty is the cruelest thing for us right now because we don't know. We've had some cell phone conversations, but we've been ordered away from the phones at this point. And during picking up our baggage, we weren't allowed to make cell phone calls. Most of us have contacted our families, and I think we're going to be okay, but we're not going to get home for a while.
The passengers were escorted to waiting shuttle buses that took them away from the airport, but none knowing where they were bound. With only birds left to fly at LAX today, American Airlines pilots were left waiting for their next move and pondering what had happened.
Our job is to get people safely from here to there. It's never, ever even crosses your mind about turning into the World Trade Center or anything like that. I mean, our last trip, just 2 days ago, we flew by it on our approach into LaGuardia for a turn down there, and it's all nice in one piece then. It's no longer that way now.
It said before, but it bears repeating again, LAX is closed. And I just talked with LAX police just about an hour ago, asked them when or if the airport might be reopened. All they would say was that it would happen sometime tomorrow. They would not give a specific time as to when the airport might be up and running again. Reporting live at LAX, Philip Palmer, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Back to you in the studio.
Philip, thank you very much. Of course, it rocks your sense of security, whether you're an adult or you're a child, but many small children really don't understand what's going on, and many adults are stunned with grief. But at the same time, we're trying to keep young people and children from being afraid. Eyewitness News reporter Henry Alfaro tells us how local schools and students are dealing with this situation.
By the time students arrived for classes this morning, most were aware of the tragic events in New York City and Washington, D.C. Roy Romer, superintendent of the Los Angeles Unified School District, said schools would remain open.
We are keeping our schools open. Children are safe there. And terrorism's aim is to disrupt society. For us to close our school gives them more of a victory. I don't want to give them that victory.
Romer is also sending letters to all parents, urging them to talk to their children and help them cope. At Benjamin Franklin Elementary School in Glendale, it appeared to be another normal school day. This morning, through an intercom announcement, the principal assured the children that they were safe in the classroom.
Our job and your parents' job is to keep you safe.
The principal, Linda Russo Milano, said since the older students were already talking about what they had seen on TV, she took the initiative to ease any fears.
Well, my main concern would be to answer in a way that does not bring any fright to them or fear, and to talk with them honestly as possible.
Milano said there was no panic among parents. Some sixth grade students did express their concerns.
Thank God that we're safe, and I feel sorry for all those people who died, and that hopefully that people who survived at least can recover really fast. That's what I pray for.
Why do you think something like this happens?
I don't know, maybe people just don't have a heart and don't really like people. It's just really sad.
The students said they had been talking about what they saw on TV before going to school.
We talked that, whoever did this is very mean and they shouldn't have done it. They should think about other people and how they're going to react to it.
The students here at Franklin Elementary School realized that this was a day where their country was attacked by an unknown enemy. Their major concern is that they hope that it won't happen here. Henry Alfaro reporting for ABC 7 Eyewitness News.
The Los Angeles City Fire Department's urban search and rescue team is on its way right now to New York City. The 62 team members packed up their search dogs and their gear in Sherman Oaks this afternoon. They need to be self-contained, so their 50,000 pounds of equipment includes not only specialized search gear, but also medical supplies and food. The unit is one of several national teams trained to go into collapsed buildings and look for victims.
The issues we had at Oklahoma City pretty much approximated, but I'd multiply that by 100 times. And again, by 100 times more victims, it appears at this time. We don't really know. And again, the assessment will be made by the on-scene resources. We'll meet up with them, and we'll be delegated responsibilities.
President George W. Bush has ordered a military transport to fly the team from March Air Force Base here near Riverside to McGuire Air Force Base on the East Coast.
The worst terrorist attack to ever have taken place on U.S. soil began early this morning on the East Coast. We are going to look at some pictures from earlier today. There you see it, New York City, struck by two hijacked airlines. There's the Twin Towers being struck. One occurred at about 8:45 this morning, and then moments later, Flight 175 hit as well, virtually destroying that building and many people presumed dead inside.
Indeed. Ultimately, both buildings collapsed. It was a surreal moment. People, thousands of them, witnessed at least the second plane crashing into that tower. And it was captured on videotape, which is an amazing thing. And then to see the buildings collapse, here's President Bush.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices, secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world, and no one will keep that light from shining. Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington, which had to be evacuated today, are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbored them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight, I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day, yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you. Good night, and God bless America.
The President of the United States, when he is in many respects needed most. And we've been joined, we've been joined by George Stephanopoulos, who's been downtown all day and who very quickly picked up, George, that the President may have given us a hint in his first couple of lines there to the magnitude of this.
He said thousands of lives that were suddenly ended, the first number we've had all day by an official verifying the magnitude of the casualties. Thousands of lives suddenly ended. He also did a lot of other things in this very short speech, Peter. He gave voice to the anger that many Americans are feeling. He talked about the quiet, unyielding anger of America, and then was very pointed in giving reassurance. Military is prepared. The emergency teams are on their way. Government will be back to business tomorrow. Our economy will be back to business tomorrow. And then finally, Peter, what I found most interesting in the section about where he talked about retaliation, he said America would make no distinction between the terrorists and those who harbor them, which is a message to any state which may be supporting these terrorists who are behind this act.
Well, which creates a huge dilemma for the United States of America, because if it is discovered, as we've talked several times throughout the day, that a state, and I've forgotten who it was, a former director of the CIA perhaps earlier today, who said he couldn't believe that a state would actually support Jim Woolsey, former director of CIA, who said directly he couldn't believe that a state would actively support an act such as this, though it may have over periods of time, as Iran and Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan have all been suspected to do, give collateral or
and that's
indirect support down through the years.
The word that the president used was so expansive, Peter. It wasn't just supported or funded. It was any who harbored them, who may have given them sanctuary at any time. That is a very open-ended commitment.
And then I thought, by the way, also, if I may add, that this president particularly, who feels so strongly about his Christianity, felt it a good time to say, to quote those lines from Psalm 23, even though I walk, or yea, though I walk through the valley of death, I fear no evil, because God is with me. And that will just sit so appropriately, I believe, in the minds and the sentiments of many Americans tonight. And we've felt throughout the day, we heard scattered reports of people going to churches and saying a prayer for those people who may or may not be lost, and for the families of those people around the country. Because don't forget, relatives and These locations have relatives all over the country. This is a total engagement with the nation. And I think you pretty much covered it all, except for one thing, George. The President talked also about the sense of safety and security of young people in America, particularly who were threatened today. And we heard that from people around the country today, people who simply could not believe, as it was the case at Oklahoma City, that this was happening in the United States. It's always something that happens somewhere else.
Or in the movies. And this is far worse than any plot that anyone could have ever devised. And I think I was downtown, as you mentioned today, Peter, so it was more surreal there, almost because people were so determined to get back to the normal life, even as all of downtown was being closed off. So I was a little bit cut off from what was happening around the country, but you did feel it down there.
But I think this is very characteristic of New York, and probably would have been characteristic of any other major community in the country, any other community as well. Terry Moran, who covers Mr. Bush for us today, but ironically wasn't with him today as he went on this education trip, not on normal. I think you are now, Terry, back at your regular location on the north lawn of the White House. Does that mean the White House has loosened up just a little bit?
Well, it has, Peter. The White House has leapt to life after several hours of the White House compound itself and the blocks around it in Washington essentially being deserted, a ghost town really coming in here. It is now a beehive of activity with government officials, cabinet secretaries. The president, of course, has returned. The First Lady has returned, and they are now working well into the night on this crisis. The president that you saw in these remarks, we are told, is the man who absorbed this tragedy today. He was described as steely throughout the day, as someone who did not react with great emotion or anger, who was able to see the pictures that America saw while he was in the air in Air Force One and reacted very seriously, very soberly, pretty much as we saw him tonight.
Now, you say that the White House is up and running again, full in action, though the White House is clearly never completely out of action, no matter where it is. But what do you actually mean by that? What are they doing?
Well, what we are seeing right now is the president and his top advisors huddled in the Oval Office and in the study off the Oval Office. We saw cabinet secretaries and FEMA Director Joe Albaugh were here earlier, and Joe Albaugh is still here. He is briefing the president on the emergency response teams that he's sent out. The president is receiving information from his national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice. You just see a great deal of activity. And you're right, this was not a completely deserted White House. Vice President Cheney was here, as was Dr. Rice, through the day. And in fact, we are told that the president, while he was in the air, had an open line of communication to the vice president throughout the day.
And Terry, you know as well as I do that much of the country had this feeling of helplessness today. As the president said, our sense of safety and security as a national entity were attacked today. They must have been just as frustrated because they didn't really know any more in the White House than we did on the outside.
They did not, and the president's response and the Secret Service's response to the events as they developed was determined by misinformation sometime. At one point, there was a report of a car bomb going off at the State Department. At another point, there was a report that this plane that crashed in Pennsylvania was on its way towards Camp David, and those things helped determine the Secret Service's decision to keep the president out of Washington, to put in place this plan to take him to Air Force bases which are predetermined and keep him away from harm.
So the staff works on at the White House to get some sense of what is it. Thanks, Terry. I'll come back to you in just a minute, man. We've been joined in Washington by Leon Panetta, a former White House chief of staff for Bill Clinton, now out of government, back for the most part in California, if I remember correctly, Mr. Panetta.
That's correct.
What's the White House chief of staff do at a moment like this? Where do you reach? What buttons do you try to push? Who do you try to connect with? Are you in some respects at the mercy of the military and intelligence establishment at the moment?
Well, you should not be. What you should do is try to organize the White House team so that the main focus is in the White House. You have your security people, your military people, your defense people. You have your national security advisor, your State Department people. I think it's better to run this kind of crisis directly from the White House so the president is in charge of not only what happened, but what to do.
Take us back to Oklahoma City and to the attack on the barracks residence at Al-Khobar in Saudi Arabia. What am I, 96, 97? I apologize, I've forgotten.
I believe about 96.
Were you just immensely frustrated that you just didn't know anything?
Well, Oklahoma City, the first time we heard of Oklahoma City, it was on television. And we were sitting near the Oval Office watching television reports of what had happened. And it was only after it was first reported on television that we began to get some telephonic communication about what had taken place. But you feel rather helpless because you know a tragedy has taken place, but you don't know all of the facts and why it happened. And you know, Oklahoma is a good example of not jumping to conclusions, because in Oklahoma City, we had all kinds of thoughts that this was a Middle East terrorist effort in Oklahoma, and it turned out not to be. So I hope this country has the patience to carefully investigate, determine who really did this, and then respond.
To be open about it, we've said this several times today and reminded people in Oklahoma City that our tendency towards prejudice emerged pretty quickly and was proved to be wrong. As you have tried, I assume, to talk to people around the world today, have you picked up anything which contributes to the understanding of this?
Not really. I mean, you have obviously your suspicions about who's involved, but we are a country that believes first and foremost in justice. That's what distinguishes us from the people who carried out these acts. So I hope we take the time to fully investigate this matter, determine who did it, and then take appropriate action. That's what a great democracy does.
But there is, Mr. Panetta, tremendous pressure on the president to strike back at somebody. We've struck back at Osama bin Laden's training camps in Afghanistan, didn't get him, spent a fortune, and didn't accomplish very much. Is the pressure on the president huge to do something in order to satisfy the anger and the frustration of the American people?
The pressure is incredible, Peter. It's coming from politicians on Capitol Hill. It's coming from constituents. It's coming from, I'm sure, many in the public who want to strike back in some way. The president is the leader of this country. He's got to take the time to make sure we do what's right. And what's right in this instance is to take the time to fully investigate this matter, determine who are the culprits, and then take appropriate action. That's been the course of action that the United States has taken in the past, and it's the course of action we've got to take now.
Thanks very much, Leon Panetta, for joining us, reminding us that the president's resolve will be tested, but also so will be his patience. We've talked a lot about the attack on Al-Khobar in Saudi Arabia in the mid-1990s, when American military personnel posted in Saudi Arabia were the victims of a terrorist attack. And the retired General Wayne Downing is with us in the Washington Bureau. He was the senior military officer assigned to write the report on the Al-Khobar towers. And General Downing, you there?
Yes, I am.
Yes, you are. There's one note in the note that was handed to me a while ago about you. You were responsible for making recommendations about making U.S. citizens safe from worldwide terrorist attacks. What were your recommendations, and is there anything that happened today which suggested your recommendations were not followed?
No, I think in this particular case, Khobar Towers was a surprise. It should not have been, because we had a bombing over there in Saudi Arabia in November of 1995. And Khobar, after that bombing, was assessed to be the #1 target in the Middle East. And in the subsequent bombing in June, we found ourselves surprised, a lack of situational awareness. I don't think that's the case today. I think people in our Congress, people in the executive branch, certainly the National Commission on Terrorism that I served on last year, it was a congressionally appointed commission, pointed out that we had a serious problem with the possibility of an attack by weapons of mass destruction. And if we saw anything today, we saw an attack with weapons of mass destruction.
General Downing, I've asked this question several times today. Perhaps you wouldn't mind answering it as well. There is a sense that the intelligence community or the counter-terrorist organizations in the country were consumed with the fear or the awareness of a chemical or biological weapons attack on the United States. And this kind of conventional attack got less than full appreciation, the potential of it. Is that a fair observation?
I don't think that's fair. I think certainly we have been concerned about chemical and biological, but I think the experts in this business have always felt that our greatest threat came from a kinetic energy weapon or an event like this, a suicide, if not aircraft, certainly a suicide bomber, suicide truck.
And do you agree with others today, particularly in the intelligence community, both in it currently and even some members of Congress who said the failure here is the United States' emphasis on human intelligence around the world, that one of the mistakes the United States made was to downgrade the degree of human intelligence that people thought was necessary?
Well, this is a complicated subject. Certainly when the American barracks in Beirut was bombed in 1983, one of the findings that Admiral Long came up with on his investigation was we had a problem with intelligence. Certainly one of the things that came out of Khobar was we didn't have enough human intelligence. We did not have tactical warning. But I think what we came up with was the fact that the terrorists we're up against are not going to give us the opportunity to get tactical warning. And so it's a very, very difficult subject. Now, to be fair to the intelligence community, they have made Herculean efforts over the last several years to improve our access to tactical information. And it's a very, very difficult subject. It's a difficult subject because we as Americans are very uneasy sometimes with the type of people we have to deal with to get this kind of intelligence. So on the one hand, we want the information, but on the other hand, we get very upset sometimes with some of the dirty, rotten people you must deal with who have this kind of information. And I think we're in a new era now. I mean, I think we've seen a formal declaration of war on the United States, although it shouldn't surprise us. We've got a lot of people saying this, our enemies, people who hate us, for many years. But now we see a manifestation on a scale that is almost unbelievable.
Downing, I very much appreciate you waiting for us and taking the time to tell us, to talk to us. Is the former Commander-in-Chief of the Special Operations Unit, is General Downing, and he wrote the Khobar's report, the report which investigated the attack on Americans in Saudi Arabia in November of 1995.